Hey folks, I hope everyone is doing really well. Today, I'd love to share a story or a bit of information about Dawn of War, Winter Assault, and the Imperial Guard, because they almost didn't happen. We were wrapping up Dawn of War. I had just been promoted to lead designer, and it was my responsibility to start focusing on the expansion. We knew we were going to do an expansion, and we knew that there were going to be a certain number of features that we wanted to add to that. So it kind of fell on my shoulders to figure out what were the main features, what were the story going to be, like what changes were we going to add to the game from a design perspective. We knew we wanted to add a race. A race was always a very obvious thing to add to any expansion, with the plethora of armies that we had available to us thanks to Warhammer 40k in general and the license. It was also something that was probably going to bring some unique form of gameplay, so there was a play opportunity there. It also, from a technical component or a technical perspective, we had a lot of the pipelines down. We had the attribute editor, so we could add a race fairly easily. Then the question just became, well, what one? There's a lot of discussion regarding that. The most obvious one was probably going to be Tau or Dark Eldar. Tau, most of the perspective there was around them, their anime feel, their robot kind of nature. There was a lot of arguments of like, hey, well, Tau are just cool because they're robots, they're in these robot suits, and like there was just a lot of general kind of like appeal there, especially for people who didn't know the Warhammer 40k universe very well. So it seemed like an obvious answer, but for me, it was always going to be the Imperial Guard. I think the Imperial Guard, like the reason why I wanted to focus on them so much is there's a few different reasons. First and foremost, it added a unique form of gameplay that we hadn't seen before. As you probably know, in the base game, there weren't a lot of tanks in the game. There's a few reasons for that, some technical, some just also we didn't, we wanted the infantry to be a bigger deal. So by adding the Imperial Guard, the Imperial Guards are all about like the armor is the backbone of that army, and having them kind of forced us into a situation, or like it just drove us towards, well, we have to add armor and find an interesting gameplay opportunity for them. It also allowed us to have, like with commissars, having different forms of gameplay. There was just lots of unique gameplay opportunities there that I felt like we could play off of and appeal to a pretty decent user base that hadn't found that before. Anyone who had played Dawn of War, they hadn't seen or been able to have that type of play. There was another element. The second one is probably in a world of Warhammer 40k where you have, these space marines are like angels of death, right? Like they are epic. They are huge. They're also exceedingly rare. And I was always interested in what is the human story in Warhammer 40k? What is just the average person who grows up in a small village or a town or a city and then is recruited into the Imperial Guard, and then suddenly they're on the front lines with what seems like a lasgun, but it's really just a flashlight. And they're being asked to fight these ridiculous creatures of chaos and orcs and aliens that they've probably never seen their entire life. And then up walks this behemoth of a person, like an angel of death. There's a reason why they call them angels of death. Because they, like, if you think about it, there's so many people in the Warhammer 40k universe, and Space Marines are exceedingly rare. They're not like just army who you might see on the road every once in a while. Having one of these things like land on the battlefield would be like fighting next to an angel for one of these people. So what was that like? It gave me the opportunity, or us the opportunity, to kind of explore that more human angle. And some of that came through in the voice lines, some of that came through in just the sheer number of units that you were able to pump out and how sort of squishy they were and how like you were just sort of churning through units. So it wasn't an easy argument to make. The Imperial Guard, because they are human, that is also an argument against them. Like in a world where you have these Space Marines, why the hell would anyone want to play this sort of squishy, ordinary human? But by making that argument, I remember sitting down and having coffee with some of the executives and the producers. Relic at the time was very production driven, as opposed to, say like a Blizzard that was very design driven. And by driven, I mean most of the decision making ends up being made by that department. So for the, Relic being fairly production oriented, I had to make a fairly clear argument that yes, it did add gameplay, but it was also going to be something that strongly appealed to the audience. And what the benefit, of course, was that we knew the Warhammer 40K target audience, the player, very well. And so because of that, we could say, hey, Imperial Guard is like a very well played, like unit, like army race. They're very well chosen. They were like third or fourth or something at the time, as opposed to Space Marines and other factions that were the more obvious ones. But because of their fantasy, because it was very relatable, they were an army that was well chosen. So because of that reason, and also tanks were cool, we were able to get the go ahead and get them added into the game. And I'm really glad that we did. I'm really happy with the result that we had. There's nothing quite like seeing that big mash of units all shooting their las guns all at the same time, and then having a Layman Russ rock up behind them and start unleashing hell. The basilisks going off, like that was one of my favorites. I'd spent a bunch of time collecting Steel Legion around then, so I had like a decent army that I'd painted up and was playing. Like we played Warhammer 40K during work. Well, not during work, like during our break on a fairly regular basis. So it had a nice kind of like emotional tie-in for me personally as well. And I think that's important, like when you are doing design, I think that the more connected you can be and have that emotional kind of like just desire to work on something, I think that comes through a lot. So yeah, I'm happy, really, really happy with how the Imperial Guard turned out. So yeah, thanks for letting me share, and I'll talk to you again next time.